I came back to Chicago to honor my grandpa's memory, but what I found was an empty house, a note, and my grandma sipping tea alone from a cracked mug. My family stole the inheritance Grandpa left me and blew it on fixing up my sister's house. They figured I'd just swallow it, like I always did. But I started digging, and what I uncovered made them wish they'd never even known my name. I pushed open the door to Grandpa's house in the Chicago suburbs, expecting the familiar warmth that always greeted me when he was alive. The smell of fresh coffee, slightly burnt toast, his loud laugh echoing through the rooms. It was all part of my childhood. But now, 3 months after his death, the house felt dead. A cold, sticky silence clung to everything, like someone had flipped the switch on life itself. A Christmas tree in the corner of the living room flickered with cheap lights, its plastic star on top looking pathetic, like it was apologizing for existing. No rustling of wrapping paper, no family chaos like I remembered from growing up, just the faint clink of china against the table coming from the kitchen. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under my sneakers. My coat hung on the rack next to Grandpa's old wool scarf, still smelling of tobacco and peppermint candies. I froze, breathing it in, and for a second I could almost see him sitting in his armchair with a newspaper, like old times. But the chair was empty. So was the house. I walked through the living room, noticing dust on the coffee table where his magazines used to pile up. His old radio sat silent, its cord neatly coiled like someone decided it wasn't needed anymore. In the kitchen, I found Grandma, Edna. She was sitting at the table in a faded blue robe, hunched over a cracked mug of cold tea. A plate of dry cookies sat untouched in front of her. Her eyes, usually sparkling with mischief, were dull, like someone had stolen her light. She looked up as I came in, her lips twitching into a faint smile. Without a word, she slid a folded piece of paper toward me, sitting next to the dusty sugar bowl. My fingers hesitated over it, like I could sense the punch coming. The note was short, written in my sister Emily's sloppy handwriting. Jake, we spent your share of Grandpa's inheritance, $12,000, on fixing my house. Sorry. Take care of Grandma. Love, Emily. I read it 3 times, the words cutting like shards of glass. My brain got stuck on inheritance and fixing. That $12,000 was mine. Grandpa promised it to me a year before he died, when we sat on his porch, sipping his favorite whiskey and staring at the stars. His voice was raspy, but firm as he talked about the freedom he wanted to give me. That money was for a car, a new life, a chance to break free from the grind. I'd saved every penny I could, adding to it, working night shifts at a bar, skipping vacations, passing on new sneakers to avoid extra expenses. I lived in a rented apartment with a leaky faucet just to keep every cent. And now, nothing. Just a note. And Grandma, left with a cracked mug and stale cookies. I sat down across from her. The chair creaked like it was sharing my anger. Grandma folded her hands, her fingers trembling, not from age, but from bottled-up pain. I waited for her to soften the blow, like she always did. Instead, she looked me in the eye, her voice hitting like a hammer. We'll fix this. Something inside me cracked, not from pain, but from clarity. I wasn't the Jake who stayed quiet to keep the family happy anymore. I was ready for war. I crumpled the note in my fist, feeling the paper give way under my fingers. The house around us felt too big, too empty, but in that emptiness, something new was born. A resolve, cold and sharp as a blade. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, in the dark, staring at the note like it might speak and explain how my family stooped so low. The Christmas tree kept flickering, its light bouncing off the glass frame of a photo of Grandpa. He was smiling, his hand on my shoulder from a fishing trip when I was 10. His eyes in the picture were alive, full of faith in me. I looked away, unable to bear it. Shame and anger clawed at each other inside me, like two beasts tearing me apart. Grandma went to bed early. Her footsteps barely creaked on the old floorboards, and I heard her pause at the living room door, She didn't come in, but I felt her gaze, heavy with tired affection. Before she left, she kissed my forehead, her lips cold. She whispered that I was always the one who kept my word. Those words burned worse than the note, reminding me how many times I'd sacrificed for people who didn't care. I opened our family chat on my phone. Silence. Not a word about the inheritance. No apologies. Not even a casual "how's it going?" The last message from my mom, Carol, was a month old. A request to send $2,000 to Emily's account for urgent needs. I'd assumed it was for taxes on her new house and sent the money without asking. I always said yes. When my dad, Richard, lost $5,000 at a casino 2 years ago, I paid to keep him from getting kicked out of his place. When Emily lost her job, quit after a fight with her boss, I covered her rent for 3 months. When Mom wanted a new TV for her living room, I didn't argue, even though I was sleeping on a mattress that squeaked with every move. I was their ATM, their backup plan, their fix for every problem, and they didn't even bother to call when they took my inheritance. The next morning, I started digging. I checked Emily's Instagram. She hadn't blocked me, probably thinking I was too busy to notice. Her profile was a showcase of luxury, a new kitchen with marble countertops, designer light fixtures, a fridge with a touchscreen that cost more than my car. A story showed her in a silk robe, sipping wine, smiling in front of a panoramic window. Caption: "My fresh start. No extra baggage." Extra baggage. That's me. I laughed, but it was bitter, like vinegar. They stole the $12,000 Grandpa left me to build a life and called me baggage. I scrolled further. Another photo. Emily with Mom and Dad at her new house, all smiling. A massive TV in the background. The one Mom had dreamed of. Posted 3 days ago. They were celebrating while I was driving here, thinking about Grandpa's memorial, imagining we'd all raise a glass to him together. I found Grandma in her room. She was sitting by the window with an album of Grandpa's old letters, her fingers brushing the yellowed pages like they could bring him back. Without a word, she handed me a key, small, rusty, for his old safe in the basement. I went down there, surrounded by dust, cobwebs, and the smell of damp. The safe was hidden behind boxes of Christmas decorations, caked in a decade's worth of grime. I opened it and found folders, receipts, bank statements, all labeled in Grandpa's precise handwriting. His meticulousness always amazed me. He kept every receipt, every bill, like he knew they'd one day be a weapon. By lunch, I had my first clues. Transfers from Grandpa's account to Emily's, made a month before he died. Mom's signatures on withdrawals she had no right to make. Records of cash pulled from ATMs near the gas station on Lake Street, where Dad always bought his cigarettes. I stacked the papers, my heart pounding faster. This wasn't just theft. It was a conspiracy, planned and cold-blooded. Grandma came downstairs, holding an old, worn notebook with a faded cover. She sat on a dusty chair, her eyes burning like coals. She pointed to a page where Grandpa had jotted down dates and amounts Mom had taken from his savings. Her voice was calm, but steely. Start with 2018. I realized she wasn't just an ally. She was my general, ready to fight to the end. By midnight, Grandma and I had pieced together a timeline stretching back years. In 2018, when Grandpa was in the hospital after a stroke, Mom got power of attorney over his account, claiming it was for his medical bills. But the statements told a different story. Money went to Nordstrom, Sephora, trips to Vegas. Emily used his card for new dresses and makeup. Dad withdrew cash for his investments, code for casino losses. They thought Grandpa wouldn't notice, that he was too weak to check. But he did. In the safe, I found a letter from him, written in a shaky hand, the ink smudged like he'd been in a hurry. "Jake, they'll bleed you dry if you don't stop them. Protect Edna." I read the letter 3 times, a chill running down my spine. Grandpa knew. He tried to warn me, but I was too busy. Working, living, trying to please a family that saw me as a wallet. I folded the letter into my pocket, like it could give me strength. My hands shook, not from fear, but from a rage growing with every new page of statements. The next blow came when I found a draft of Grandpa's will, dated 2 months before his death. It clearly stated, $12,000 to me, $5,000 to Grandma, the rest to a veterans charity he respected his whole life. But the official will, read after his funeral, left nothing for me. Instead, it all went to the family, meaning Emily, Mom, and Dad. I didn't fight it then, thinking it was a mistake, that they couldn't do that to me. Now I knew there was no mistake. They rewrote his wishes while he was dying. Grandma sat beside me, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of the notebook. She told me how Mom, as a young woman, stole her savings for a new car and then blamed Grandpa to avoid a fight. History was repeating itself, only now I was the target. Her eyes were full of pain, but burned with resolve. She knew I wouldn't stop. The next day, I drove to downtown Chicago to meet Kevin, my lawyer friend, at a small cafe on Michigan Avenue. The street noise, car horns, footsteps, drowned out my thoughts, but I felt a growing confidence inside. Kevin flipped through the statements, his eyebrows climbing higher. He set the papers down and looked at me over his glasses, his voice serious. This is inheritance fraud, and possibly financial exploitation of an elderly person. He paused, studying my face. You ready to go all the way? I nodded, my pulse hammering in my temples. I didn't just want the money back. I wanted the truth, and I wanted them to pay, for the lies, the betrayal, for leaving Grandma with a cracked mug while they sipped wine in Emily's new house. That evening, I went back to the basement and found another clue, an email from Emily to Mom, sent a week before Grandpa died. She wrote that I was too busy with work to notice $12,000 missing and suggested saying it was a gift. Mom agreed, adding that Grandma wouldn't object. I saved the email, my anger boiling over. They stole my future and called it a gift. I dug deeper into the boxes and stumbled on something unexpected. A copy of a surveillance video from Grandpa's house. It was dated the day they supposedly rewrote the will. The footage showed Emily walking in with a notary I'd never seen. Grandpa was in hospice that day, hooked up to machines. They forged his signature while he was dying. My stomach twisted, but I copied the file to a flash drive. This was my ace in the hole. I didn't sleep the second night either. The video played in my head like a stuck record. Emily, smiling at the notary like they were old friends. Grandpa, dying in hospice while his will was rewritten. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms, leaving red marks. This wasn't just theft. It was betrayal, cold and calculated, like a knife in the back. In the morning, I showed the video to Grandma. She watched in silence, her face like stone, lips pressed into a thin line. When it ended, she stood and walked to her room, her steps heavy, like each one drained her. An hour later, she came back with Grandpa's old diary, its leather cover cracked and worn. She opened it to the last pages, where he wrote about his suspicions. He'd noticed Mom and Emily rifling through his papers when they thought he was asleep. He warned me not to trust them. My throat tightened. Grandpa knew what they'd do, but couldn't save me in time. I hid the diary in the safe, deciding it would be my weapon. But I needed more. I drove to the hospice where Grandpa spent his final weeks. The building smelled of antiseptic and loneliness, its walls painted a dull beige. The nurse Marge remembered me. I'd brought Grandpa his favorite pastrami sandwiches when he could still eat. I asked if Mom or Emily had visited him. Marge frowned, her fingers pausing on a file. She recalled Emily bringing papers, but Grandpa refused to sign them. He was weak, but his mind was clear. He said he'd already settled everything with me. I thanked her and left, feeling the puzzle coming together. Emily tried to get Grandpa to rewrite the will, but he wouldn't budge. so they forged his signature after he died. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act. It was a plan they'd cooked up for months. Back home, I found Grandma in the living room, flipping through old photos of Grandpa, her fingers trembling. She looked at me, her eyes full of pride. She said Grandpa always saw hope in me. I sat beside her, and we were quiet. The silence was heavy, but there was strength in it. We were a team, bound not just by blood, but by a shared mission. The next day, my phone buzzed with an unexpected call. It was Aunt Linda, my dad's brother's wife. Her voice shook as she asked to meet. I picked a park on the edge of Chicago, away from prying eyes. Linda showed up in an old coat, her eyes red like she'd been crying all night. She nervously twisted her bag's strap, glancing around like she was scared someone was watching. She confessed that Emily had been blackmailing her. A year ago, Linda borrowed money from Emily for her son's medical bills, but couldn't pay it back on time. Emily used it to silence her about the forged will. Linda had seen Emily and Mom meeting the notary behind Grandpa's back. She wanted to tell me, but was terrified Emily would ruin her family. I recorded her words on my phone, with her permission. It was the first crack in their armor. Linda gave me the notary's name, Gary Walsh, a guy with a shady reputation in Chicago's legal circles. I looked him up online. Reviews called him a problem solver for cash. His office was in a rundown building downtown, with peeling paint on the facade. I booked an appointment under a fake name, pretending I needed a will. Walsh was a balding guy in a cheap suit, with a nervous smile that never left his face. I mentioned Emily, watching his reaction. His eyes twitched, and he quickly changed the subject, rambling about his services. I knew I'd hit a nerve. Back home, I told Grandma about Linda. She nodded, her face stern. She pulled another folder from the safe, letters from Grandpa mentioning Walsh. He'd suspected the notary was working with Mom back in 2017, helping her reassign car paperwork. It wasn't their first time using him. I decided to play their game. Instead of running to Kevin with the new evidence, I started setting a trap. Emily, Mom, and Dad were due back in a couple of days. Their vacation at Emily's house was ending. I wanted them to walk into the house, smug in their victory, and face a truth they couldn't dodge. I set up a small camera in the living room, hidden behind Grandpa's old radio. It recorded everything at the table, with clear audio. I prepared a folder with copies of all the evidence, statements, letters, Grandpa's diary, Linda's recording, the video with the notary. If they tried to lie, the camera would catch every word. I felt like a hunter setting a trap. Grandma helped however she could. She found old letters from Mom, begging Grandpa for money for emergencies, promising to pay him back, but never doing it. Each letter was another nail in their coffin. She sat at the table, sorting papers, her hands moving slowly but steadily. She looked at me, her eyes fierce with determination. She said they'd always been like this, but she'd hoped they'd spare me. I hugged her, feeling her frail shoulders tremble. For the first time in years, I realized I wasn't alone. We were two soldiers, ready for the final battle. While I set the trap, I got an anonymous email, no signature. It had a photo, Mom, Emily, and a man I didn't know, standing in Walsh's office. In the background, a folder with Grandpa's bank logo. The caption read, "They're planning more than you think." My stomach dropped. I showed it to Grandma, and her face darkened. She recognized the man, Mark, an old friend of Dad's who worked at the bank. Grandpa never trusted him, called him slippery as an eel. I dug deeper. I checked Grandpa's old notes and found one about Mark. He'd helped Mom open an account for Grandpa's money back in 2016. I called Kevin, who confirmed Mark was fired from the bank for shady transactions, but avoided court. He was their accomplice, the guy who helped cover their tracks. I decided to meet Mark. I found his address in Grandpa's old phone book and drove to his place in the suburbs. His house was modest, but a shiny new car sat in the driveway, too pricey for someone supposedly living on a pension. I knocked, introducing myself as an old friend of Grandpa's. Mark opened the door, his face tense. He invited me in, but his hands shook as he poured coffee. I brought up Grandpa's will, watching his reaction. He started talking about the weather, dodging the topic. I knew he was hiding something. Back home, I checked the bank statements again. I found transfers to an account linked to Mark, made the day before Grandpa died. The amount, $3,000. This wasn't just about stealing my inheritance. They were planning to take everything Grandpa left, including Grandma's savings. I saved the evidence, my anger turning into cold resolve. They didn't just betray me. They wanted to erase everything Grandpa left us. They came back a week later, acting like nothing had happened. Their laughter cut through the air as they dragged their suitcases inside. Emily walked in first, wearing new sunglasses, her hair curled like a celebrity's. She tossed her bag on the couch and grimaced at Grandma's blanket, like it was trash. Mom followed, in a silk scarf that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She scanned the kitchen, expecting dinner, like Grandma was their maid. Dad came in last, sweaty and irritated, muttering about traffic on I-94. I sat at the table, hands folded. Emily's note lay in front of me like a trophy. The camera in the corner recorded quietly, its red light hidden behind the radio. Emily saw me first. Her smile faltered, but she recovered, tossing me a casual glance. Mom looked at me like I was furniture and headed to the fridge, sighing at its contents. Dad collapsed into a chair, not even glancing at Grandma, who sat in the corner, clutching her cracked mug. I stood slowly, my pulse pounding in my temples. I said I had something for them. They exchanged looks, but sat at the table. Emily rolled her eyes. Mom tapped her nails on the countertop. Dad fidgeted with his cigarette pack. I opened my laptop. I started with a spreadsheet I'd built over 5 sleepless nights. Every transfer from Grandpa's account to Emily's. Every cash withdrawal at the gas station where Dad bought his cigarettes. Every emergency charge that turned out to be a new couch, a Vegas trip, or a dress for Emily. I showed it all. Amounts, dates, names. Mom's face went pale. Her fingers froze. Emily gripped her phone so hard her knuckles turned white. Dad coughed but didn't look up. I played the second video, screenshots of their texts. Emily saying I was too soft to check. Mom replying that Grandma wouldn't care. Then the surveillance footage of Emily walking into the house with the notary, while Grandpa was dying. I played Linda's audio, her tears, her words about the blackmail. Finally, I showed the anonymous photo. Mom, Emily, and Mark in Walsh's office. The room went so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Emily jumped up, her voice shaking with rage, screaming it was all lies. Dad mumbled about a misunderstanding, his hands trembling. Mom stayed silent, her eyes darting around like a trapped animal's. I opened one last tab, a draft email. Subject: Inheritance fraud and financial exploitation. Recipients: Grandpa's lawyer, the local prosecutor, the Elder Protection Agency, and 3 news sites, including the Chicago Tribune. I told them they had 48 hours to return the $12,000, or it was going to everyone. Emily laughed, but it was nervous, like she was trying to convince herself it was a joke. Dad clenched his fists, his face red. Mom tried to stand, but Grandma, who'd been silent, rose. Her voice was quiet, but cut like a knife. I raised all of you. And you left me with a cracked mug and stole my grandson's dream. The room froze. Even Emily shut up. Grandma looked at me, and I saw pride in her eyes. The first 24 hours were quiet. No calls, no texts. I waited, sitting with Grandma in the living room as she knitted another scarf. We checked the bank account every 2 hours. Nothing. The camera stayed on, just in case they came back. I felt time dragging, like every second was testing my resolve. On the second day, I sent the email. All the files, all the evidence, all the recordings. Copies went to the lawyer, the prosecutor, and the Chicago Tribune. I included the recording of our confrontation, with Emily yelling and Mom silent. I knew it would break them. By evening, chaos erupted. Emily called first, her voice shaking with anger. She screamed that I was ruining her life, that her boss saw an article that leaked online. Headline: Chicago family steals grandson's inheritance and abandons grandmother. 38,000 shares overnight. Mom texted, begging me to stop, saying I'd gone too far. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded her text to Kevin. Dad showed up at the house at 11 p.m., drunk and furious. He pounded on the door, his voice booming, calling me a traitor, a disgrace to the family. I didn't open it. Grandma sat beside me, squeezing my hand. She said he was always weak. I nodded, her words strengthening my resolve. On the third day, the prosecutor responded. A case was opened. Kevin said they were preparing a lawsuit for fraud and financial elder abuse. The amount, with interest and damages, $18,500. Mom showed up the next day. No makeup, hair in a messy bun. She handed me an envelope, her hands shaking. Inside was a check for $12,000. She looked at me, her eyes red with anger and shame. She said I'd ruined them. I said they'd done it to themselves. Emily paid a week later, in installments. Her new Instagram, where she tried to play the victim, was flooded with comments. Someone posted her old extra baggage caption, and it became a meme. She got fired from her marketing firm. Dad held out the longest. He posted online that I was a liar, that it was all fake. But then Aunt Linda filed for divorce, taking half their business. She called me, her voice steady. I'm done lying for them. By the end of the second week, the money was back. $12,000 from Mom and Dad, $4,000 from Emily with interest, $2,500 from Dad, borrowed from a friend. Total, $18,500. I spent $5,000 on a new car, like Grandpa wanted. $3,000 went to medical insurance for Grandma and a new hearing aid. The rest went into a secure account in her name. When I showed her the papers, she hugged me so tight I could feel her heart beating. She whispered that they'd taken everything from her, but not me. I didn't just win the money. I won myself. The weight I'd carried for years, guilt, duty, shame for not being loved enough, lifted. I stood taller, my shoulders straight for the first time in years. They stopped calling. The silence was alive, not panicked or heavy, but clean, like after surgery. I quit the bar, where nights blurred into a stream of drunk voices. I found a remote IT job that paid better and left me time to live. I moved with Grandma to a small house on the edge of Chicago, where the air smelled of grass, not exhaust. Her room was filled with Grandpa's photos and her old blanket, which she called her fortress. Mine had bare walls, which I started filling with my dreams. One evening, Grandma knocked on my door. She sat on the edge of my bed, her hands fidgeting with the blanket's edge. She asked why I didn't walk away when I found the note. I thought about it, looking at her wrinkled face, her eyes that had seen too much pain. I said I remembered who I was before they made me forget, who Grandpa wanted me to be. She nodded, her eyes shining. She said she was proud of me. Those words meant more than all the money in the world. Months later, I met Linda at a corner cafe. She looked lighter, freer, her face no longer tense. She was studying to be an accountant, building a life without lies. She said I didn't just change my life, I changed hers by showing her she could walk away. I nodded, feeling her words settle in my chest. My family tried to rewrite the story. Emily posted quotes about forgiveness, posing with candles in church. Mom told friends I manipulated Grandma, leaving out how she stole her savings. Dad made a video calling me a traitor, but the comments reminded him of his debts. Mom tried starting a gardening blog. It shut down after one video when someone commented, "Are those the flowers bought with stolen inheritance?" Emily failed a background check for a new job. Dad lost friends when the rumors spread. I don't yell anymore. I don't explain. The truth did its work. Now I sleep soundly, with the lights off, because I have nothing left to fear. They took everything they could, and I took myself back. So what's your family like? Share your story in the comments.